As a way to begin a pilgrimage or any retreat, I know from my own experience that it takes a bit of time to slow down and move into the weekend. And I know that we all live in a world now where communication is right there at our fingertips, and we're so used to, grabbing our iPhone or going online or whatever. So I'm going to really challenge you to put aside those things as much as you can, so that you can really center yourself and take a break. Because retreat, is what it means. It's retreat. We leave something that we're very busy with all the time, and we move into a new space. And I can tell you, I know how hard it is to do that, and I know it's even harder if I'm attached to this electrical gadget. So try to do that. Try really hard to just let go and let God lead you. Okay? So your theme this for our weekend is living the joy of the gospel, and of course that's a very timely one, given Pope Francis's letter. How many of you have read it? How many of you looked at it? Okay. Or even read a paragraph. This is really hard. I'm bad. It's the teacher in me. Did you do your homework? Well, I haven't read it all, so don't feel bad. I have read some of it, but I haven't read it all. So hopefully at the end of this weekend, you'll be a little bit more curious about that document, and you might want to pick it up, because it's really quite wonderful. It's joyful. It's really joyful. It's refreshing. You're going to really pick up the personality of Francis, Pope Francis. You really will. I think it will bring you closer to him and to really what joy is all about. So I'm going to start with a little piece that I took from what he wrote, and I'm going to share it with you. I invite all Christians everywhere at this very moment to a renewed personal encounter with Jesus Christ, or at least an openness to letting him encounter them. I ask all of you to do this unfailingly each day. No one should think that this invitation is not meant for him or her, since no one is excluded from the joy that can come from the Lord. The Lord does not disappoint those who take this risk. Whenever we take a step toward Jesus, we come to realize that he is already there, waiting for us with open arms. It's a beautiful image, eh? It's beautiful. It is impossible, though, to grow closer to God without learning to love others. For the one who does not love another will remain in darkness. Now, these words that I just read to you also echo the words of Francis's predecessor, Benedict XVI, who said, "Closing our eyes to our neighbor also blinds us to God, and that love is, in the end, the only light which can illuminate the world and give us lasting joy." So I'd like to tell you a little bit about a pilgrimage that I made a few years ago when I worked at King's in campus ministry. A few of us from campus ministry, we took up a group of students your age to a place called Pine Channel. And Pine Channel is a little island in the middle of Lake Athabasca. So we're talking northern Saskatchewan, right where the Saskatchewan and the Northwest Territories meet. Okay? And we went there to join the Dene people. And this is their annual pilgrimage. So you have to get there by boat, and there's no electricity, and there's no water, there's no running water, there's no, it's the outhouse, so we're really camping. But on the island, the first thing you see when you come up in the boat is this big tall tower, right? And that's where the chapel is. So this is their time to be together. It's 3 different communities who actually don't get along very well. And one group sits over here, and another group camps here, and another group is over there, and we're all in the middle, right by the church. And so, I'm used to camping, and I quite like it. Even though I'm getting old, I still very much like to do that. And but where I struggled at the beginning of this pilgrimage was when we gathered for prayer. So every night at 5 o'clock the bell goes, everybody comes to the chapel. So the bell goes at 5, but we don't all get in the chapel till about 5:30. So we're sitting there waiting. And then I think, okay, now we're gonna start. No, we don't. So somebody from each of those communities gets up and reads off the list of intentions for that Mass. You know how we have, this Mass is for, the repose of the soul of so-and-so or whatever. So they would get up, and talk about who this Mass was for. But it went on for at least a half an hour. And I'm saying to myself, this is so unnecessary. All they really need to do is put these papers on the altar, for crying out loud. Why do we have to hear all this? And there was the bishop up there at the time, Murray Chatelain, I was talking to him one night about this, and he just laughed at me. He just laughed, and he said, that's your way. This isn't the way that it is here. He said, you need to listen. So so we were there for like 10 days, so I knew I was going to get a lot of chance to listen. And so I started to really, really listen to what was being read out. And I suddenly realized that this was their sacred story, right? This is like they meet once a year. So I got to learn about everything that went on in those communities for a whole year. Who had died, who got married, who was born, who was in jail, who was in rehab, who had run away from home, whose house had burned down, whose family was out hunting, and would they have would please God, give them a safe trip. Help everybody that's coming by boat to Pine Channel to have a safe trip. They prayed for us. They prayed for the bishop. And, it started to sink in that this really was their story, and that they were actually, sharing an intimate part of themselves with us. And so, we just sat there, and it became more and more profound for me as I listened. And then we found that, then some of the students that I was with said, well, do you think that they would be okay with them if we asked if we could share our intentions? And of course they said, of course you can. So then there we were, listening to one another's sacred stories. And we went from being, strangers from another culture to actually being a community together. And that's what brought me great joy, was that experience. And as I was saying to Carolyn, what brings me joy, it's also a challenge, don't get me wrong, is relationships. And I could see the difference, I could see the movement. That we weren't just sitting over here then. We sat with everybody. We didn't all sit together. We sit beside different people every day at church. So it was a coming out of myself and taking the patience and time to just let the experience soak in. And that's, I guess, what a pilgrimage really is. It's taking the time to just savor the experience. But it can, for us, or for me anyway, that was a challenge at the very, very beginning. So, and by the end, I would say that those of us that were able to let go and to let God lead us, we went home changed. We were spirit-filled, and we were full of joy. So that's my hope for you on this pilgrimage weekend, that you will have a renewed encounter with Jesus, and that Jesus' presence will be revealed to you sacramentally through our prayer together, through your own personal prayer, and through the situations and the places and the people that I know you're going to meet this weekend. I kind of had a look at what's ahead for you. And that is where you will meet the face of Jesus, and that is where you will see the face of joy, is in the eyes of another person. And one another too, the people that you know. And I pray too that you will have an expansiveness of heart, that you will deepen your understanding and and your belief that all people are created in the image and the likeness of God, and therefore they are God's beloved children, and that we're called to be brothers and sisters and neighbors to one another. I mean, it's very easy to say, but it's, as Joan was saying, you gotta, what if you go to have an encounter this weekend with someone you don't really like? They're God's brothers, they're God's children too. Or someone you may not feel particularly attracted to. my experience has always been that's the person I really do need to go to. So that's part of my prayer for you. So seeing the whole world as our neighborhood is at the heart of the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph. We care deeply about our relationship with God, and through this relationship, we have grown in the awareness that all is in God and God is in all. We work to make connections, and we believe in the power of relationships, that coming together to form community, we find our way forward, and we have courage to open ourselves to becoming the change that we seek in the world. If we want change, we have to make it happen. We also look for we look at the social patterns. What's going on in the world? For example, when we stand with people who are experiencing poverty or homelessness, well, homelessness is poverty, I guess, we begin to see the roadblocks that prevent them from attaining a better life. We also collaborate with others. People who share our charism is wonderful. I see the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph in all kinds of folks that aren't sisters, so it's wonderful. So we collaborate with these people who share our vision to address issues like poverty, human trafficking, ecology, parity birth, and poverty reduction. All is in God, and God is in all. During the days that Jesus, I want to look for a little bit now at Jesus and Jesus' encounters and how he brought joy to people. During the days that Jesus spent here on earth, he too worked to address the unmet needs of his time. He also made lasting friendships, and he formed relationships with the most unlikely of people. If you know your scriptures, you know what I'm talking about. And in his letter, Pope Francis reminds us how good it is to contemplate the closeness of Jesus, the closeness that Jesus showed to everyone. This is what Francis says. If Jesus spoke to someone, he looked into their eyes with deep love and concern. And so if you revisit the scriptures and really pray with them, you will see how accessible he is as he draws near to the blind man and eats and drinks with the sinners. Do you remember the story of the woman at the well? Do you remember that? And how he restored that woman's dignity? Or the leper, who, having been considered unclean and less than human, was restored to health and to his community. And this is one of my favorites. Joan will remember. I don't know if she'll remember this, but what about the excitement of Zacchaeus as he ran home to prepare a meal that he would later share with Jesus? Now remember, he was a tax collector, so he was hated by everyone. And he was probably a bit of a swindler too, in collecting taxes and keeping a little bit for yourself, But we know that Zacchaeus was forever changed by Jesus' compassion, for he vowed that he would give half of his possessions to the poor, and that if he had cheated anyone, he would pay 4 times the amount back to them. That man's life was changed, and I can just see the joy. Have you ever had that experience when you know you're understood? When you know that someone else understands you? I think that brings us great joy. It is my hope that you will also be moved by these examples that I've shared with you of Jesus, that you will want to enter fully into your pilgrimage by sharing something of yourself with those you meet, that you will listen with intent, ask questions, and rejoice with those that are happy, and weep with those that are sad. And I also pray that you will do this not from a sense of obligation or as a burdensome duty, but as the result of your own personal decision, which has the potential to bring you joy and give new meaning and purpose to your lives in this weekend, in the days that follow, and in the months that follow, and in the years that follow. Okay? You're all at the age now where you're making decisions about what you want to do with your life. This is the perfect way to do that. I mean, this isn't a vocation we can pursue, but I believe that vocations are, I think that Jesus seduces us a little bit, So when you feel your heart moving, you have to ask yourself, what might God be asking me to do about this situation? Or Or maybe I could work at this, or I've never thought about that before. I've never really thought about those relationships or my relationships. And maybe I do have a hunger in me for more prayer and reflection. That's part of the call. That's part of the going deeper into your relationship. And that's all possible for you this weekend if you open yourself to it. A man by the name of Paul Tillich, who some of you may know, writes that joy is not a thing that one simply has. It is not easy to attain. It is, and always was, a rare and precious thing. Joy is the foundation on which our happiness and our pleasure are built. Joy does not take away the risk and the dangers and the suffering of life, but rather it actually makes the joy of life possible in pleasure and in pain, in happiness and in unhappiness. Joy can be found in the simplest of things, and it doesn't cost anything other than our time and our attention. So I'm going to tell you a few things that bring me joy. I remember when my nieces and my nephew were born, and a lot of us have talked about that this evening. There's just nothing like it. There's just nothing like a newborn, holding a newborn in your arms. And I can remember watching the faces of my sisters and my brother-in-laws, and they were transformed by the birth of their child. And from my teaching days, several little ones come to mind, and the ones that come to mind are those that struggle to learn to read or learn to count, and seeing the light go on in their eyes and in their faces. Those were moments of joy for me. And I also remember when I was a very little girl, my mother had a beautiful flower garden. She's English, so we had a lovely little English garden. And I can remember, in the spring she'd take me outside and we'd we'd brush away all the leaves, all that had gathered in the garden. And there were all these little green shoots. And that just excited me. And my mom would say, those are the first violets, those are the first snowdrops. It's a good memory that I have of me and my mother, and it brought me wonder and awe. And to this day, I just love it in the spring when I go out and take off the leaves and new life is coming. And I even recall the bittersweet joy that I felt when my parents both died. When I realized that their physical suffering was over and that they were going to see the face of God for the first time, face to face. I never thought I'd be able to do that. I always thought, when my mom and dad die, I'm probably going to die too, because I just couldn't imagine life without them. But then, having seen them suffer, I think it was one of your little "Have you ever" questions was, it's amazing that see the suffering go, even though you love them, you're going to let them go because you want them to be happy in the new life. So that was a moment of joy too for me. And I also remember a few months ago when a certain person who's sitting near me asked me to consider mentoring the two women who are soon going to enter our community. We were sitting at the table, and an energy and a spark, which I know now was joy, leapt up within me, and I was reminded of Mary's visit to Elizabeth, right? You remember that story, that caused a similar joy as John leapt for joy in his mother's womb. I felt that same spark of energy. My life as a sister of St. Joseph has been and continues to be a rich and full one. One of our practices that brings me the most joy is when I gather with my sisters to share the state of the heart and what we call the order of the house, a practice that goes way back to the beginning of our community in 16th century France. And we ask ourselves these kinds of questions. What are the things, big and little, that have been occurring in my life? Is there a pattern or a theme that is beginning to emerge? What might God be calling me to? After each of us has shared, we then reflect on how the Holy Spirit is moving in the group, and what the Spirit might be calling us to as a group next. And I can tell you that when you listen to the stories and experiences of others in a prayer context. It's actually very profound. My sisters have brought me to a new level of communal acceptance and understanding, and it has helped me to see my sisters with different eyes, with new eyes. I don't know about you, and I've said this already. When I feel understood, I experience great peace of mind and immense joy. And the state of the heart has really helped us with that. And just yesterday, one of my directees commented that had she not remained faithful to her spiritual struggle of the past 3 years, she would not have come to the realization that God loves her just as she is. So being in harmony with herself and her God has brought her great joy. She learns that she doesn't have to be perfect. She just has to be, and God will love her. On Wednesday afternoon, a couple of days ago, I spent some time with my sister, who's helping me with this new house. And when I told her that you were coming to London, and told her what your theme was, that it was joy, her face lit up, and she said, "Susan, joy, it's a song in the heart."